Can we break this down in your thoughts about sleep and how you frame this, some of the research and the science that you've studied around this, and what we should be thinking about around sleep?
Sure. So sleep is the fundamental layer of mental and physical health. If there's one thing that we should all be doing is working toward sleeping long enough and deeply enough 80% of the time.
Okay.
I think that 80% is a good goal because things happen.
Yeah.
Right?
Travel
happens, kids happen, illnesses
the weekend,
happen.
you're going out or whatever, yeah.
Until you are sleeping long enough and deeply enough, 80% of the nights of your life, you are functioning suboptimally.
And what's the biggest risk then if we're not getting enough sleep?
Okay, so there are a number of risks to not getting enough sleep. Deficits in learning, deficits in the immune system, reduction in testosterone and estrogen in both men and women. So disruption of hormones, disruption of gut microbiome, increased cancer risk. There are a bunch of things. The severity of those things depends on a lot of other things too. Prior health, other health conditions, context, age, occupation. You know, if you're not getting enough sleep and you're a high-rise construction worker, it's different than if you're an office worker. Okay,
Right.
so we need to sleep enough. Now, what's enough sleep? This is an interesting question. Enough sleep has been argued it's 6 hours. Other people it's 7 hours. Other people it's 8 hours. It's basically waking up without an alarm clock and feeling rested. Insomnia is actually a medical term nowadays. And insomnia is essentially diagnosed as falling asleep during the middle of the day due to lack of sleep at nighttime.
Oh, okay.
But many people who are having trouble sleeping at night are not falling asleep during the middle of the day. They're dealing with grogginess or crankiness or other effects of having fragmented sleep.
What are the main causes of not being able to fall asleep? Is it rumination? Is it traumas that you're holding on to? Is it arguments? Is it self-doubt or insecurities? Is it you nap too much? Is it the foods you ate too late? Like, what would you say are the main causes of not being able to fall asleep?
All of the above. But the primary one is a failure to turn off your thoughts.
Okay.
And I think that might provide a good anchor point for us to talk about some protocols. Really, a excellent night's sleep begins in the morning. I talked about this on the previous episode, so I won't go into detail, but everyone should get as much bright light in their eyes, ideally from sunlight, first thing in the morning, 10 to 30 minutes outside, depending on how bright it is. Eyeglasses or contact lenses are fine. Don't wear sunglasses if you can do it safely. If you wake up before the sun rises, turn on bright lights, then go outside once the sun rises. If you have no access to sunlight, use a daytime simulator or similar, like a ring light, and get that light in your eyes.
Okay.
So that's all of that in a compact form. Caffeine. You can inhibit falling asleep with caffeine. You have to figure out when your threshold is. For me, I can drink caffeine up until about 3, even 4 o'clock in the afternoon and sleep like a baby.
And still sleep well.
Yes, and Matt Walker, our good friend Matt Walker, would say that my sleep isn't as good as it would be had I cut caffeine out earlier.
By like 11 or 12 a.m.
Right, and I want to acknowledge, Matt is the Michael Jordan of sleep science, and so I'm not going to...
You're the LeBron James. Yes.
No, and in fair, thank you for the compliment, but no, I'm not. I know a lot of the science and the protocols, but that's Matt's wheelhouse, and so if he says something, it's true, and if I say something and our opinions conflict, it's likely to be something that the data are still emerging, or in that case, default to Matt being correct, because I just out of due respect for his expertise. So caffeine, for some people, they can have a 2 o'clock espresso, 2 p.m. espresso. Some people it's 4 p.m. Some people can drink caffeine at 8 p.m. and fall asleep. But there I would say it's problematic because you're disrupting the architecture of sleep and the brain waves associated with sleep, the chemicals and so forth. So get that morning light. Cut your caffeine off at the time that allows you to fall asleep. That morning light also sets a timer on your melatonin rhythm. So you have this gland in your brain called the pineal gland. That pineal is the source of melatonin. Melatonin makes you sleepy, but it does not keep you asleep.
Okay.
Melatonin starts to rise in the late evening and continues into the night and then eventually tapers off. This is naturally occurring melatonin release, not supplemented melatonin release. the fastest way to slam melatonin to the pavement and eliminate it in your system is to look at bright light for, I hate to tell you this, even a few seconds. So
You mean at night?
at night is typically when melatonin rises.
Yes.
It's when it's released in the bloodstream and when it has this effect of making us sleepy. It does a number of other things
You
too.
want more melatonin at night, is that right?
You do. And
Yes.
if you wake up in the middle of the night or it's 8 o'clock and you decide you want to go to bed at 9, or it's 9 o'clock, you want to go to bed at 10, and you go into the bathroom and you flip on the bright lights, your melatonin levels just got crushed down to
So
zero.
having lights on is the worst thing you can do.
Yes, and it doesn't matter if it's blue light, red light, purple light, green light. Bright lights inhibit melatonin very acutely, and therefore you want to avoid exposure to bright lights at night if your goal is to be asleep. So the simple rule that governs all this stuff is when you want to be alert, get bright light in your eyes, ideally from sunlight. So that's true in the morning and throughout the day. And when you want to be sleepy or asleep, avoid bright light in your eyes. Now, many home environments don't allow you to have zero lights, and that's not actually necessary. You can just dim the lights in the evening. Ideally, you also avoid overhead lights because the neurons in the eye that trigger this melatonin suppression and so forth, they reside in an area of the eye that views upper visual space. So you could have desk lamps or and just dim those down. If you're going to work on a screen, dim it way down. Will blue blockers help? Yes, but if the light is bright enough,
It's still going to go
you're
through.
still going to inhibit melatonin release.
So how bad is watching TV at night?
If the TV isn't too bright and
If it's farther away,
farther
it's not
away,
like right in your...
yeah, and maybe you wear blue blockers.
Yeah.
And or I mean, some people take this to the extreme. They wear sunglasses. I think that's a little extreme. Now, candlelight and moonlight, surprisingly, doesn't seem to block melatonin. Now, maybe a really bright moonlit night, full moon, the lunacy associated with the full moon might actually be due to a suppression of melatonin and an increase in alertness. So those are the things as it relates to light.
Yes.
Then there's this issue of people who have trouble staying asleep. So they can fall asleep fine, but they wake up at 2 or 3 in the morning. I happen to do this. If I go to bed around 10:30, I tend to wake up around 3 and I use the restroom. Yeah, I tend to drink a lot of fluids and I have to use the restroom. This was true at every age. This is not just some aging related thing. That's fine. I just keep the lights dim and you use the bathroom and then you go back to sleep.
Fall back asleep.
Very normal, very healthy. One of the best things I ever did for my sleep was to keep my phone out of the room so that when I wake up at 3 in the morning, I just didn't start scrolling the newspapers is typically what I would read online.
Gotcha.
And then you're just waking up your brain, not just by the light, but by the content. And,
You're activating it again as opposed to going back to sleep.
Exactly. And sometimes there's a comment and they're like, why is it, your thinking is not very good in the middle of the night. The other thing is you want to keep the room cool. So in order to fall asleep, your body has to undergo a drop in temperature of 1 to 3 degrees. There are a couple ways to accomplish this. One is keeping the room cool. The other is to, and that's ideal actually, because you can put a hand or a foot out. We actually lose a lot of our heat through what's called our glabrous skin, so the palms of our hands, the bottoms of the feet.
I always put my feet out of the sheets and just let them feel the cool air.
That's right. And that's a great way to cool off your core body temperature. You're probably doing that unconsciously in your sleep as well. If the room were too warm, the only way for you to cool off would be for you to put your hand in a bucket of cold water. And generally people don't have that accessible.
And then you're going to go pee if you're doing that too.
Right, exactly. And then of course there are all these products nowadays of, things that cover, that cool the bed. I'm supposed to try one of these soon. I haven't tried one yet. I tend to just keep the room cool.
Cool, yeah.
And
what do you keep it at? I keep it around 67, 65.
That's a little cooler than what I do. I put it at about 67, 68.
Okay.
But I tend to wake up hot in the middle of the night, like throw the comforter off, and go put some cold water on my face.
Wow.
So don't obsess over waking up too much. And if you do, try and stay away from screens. Or if some people will read a book, dim light again.
Yeah.
And then falling back asleep. Some people are waking up at 2 or 3 because they are going to bed too late. Their melatonin has run out. So imagine that you're naturally somebody who should go to bed early, around 9. But we all have this ability to push forward and stay awake if we have to. Much easier to stay awake than to force yourself to go to sleep earlier.
Yes.
Very hard to force yourself to go to sleep. So let's say your system, you start releasing melatonin around 9 p.m., but you stay up until 11. Then you get into bed, you fall asleep around 11:30, and at 3 in the morning you suddenly wake up. Well, that's because your melatonin tapered off, and there's a wakefulness that's occurring. And so ideally you would start going to bed earlier. Now, there's a lot of discussion out there about so-called chronotypes. So night owls, morning people, people that follow a more typical schedule. Typical would be going to sleep somewhere between 10:30 and 11:30, waking up somewhere between 6:30 and 8. Then there are the people that like to go to bed at 2 a.m., sleep till 10. And then there are people that like to go to bed at 8 and wake up at 4. Huge variation out there. It tends to change across the lifetime.
Yeah, your season of life for years.
That's right. And adolescents and teenagers tend to stay up later and want to sleep in. And there's actually some evidence that they can learn better if they are allowed to use that schedule, but most schools won't adhere to that schedule.
You got to wake up at 6 and go to school at 8 or whatever, yeah.
Once you enter adult life, you're generally somebody who's going to have to learn how to go to bed early and wake up early, or at least wake up early. Now, naps, you should feel comfortable. The data say naps, you should feel comfortable napping for 90 minutes or less at any point throughout the day, as long as it doesn't interfere with your nighttime sleep. So some people, like me, I love naps, but it doesn't interfere with my nighttime sleep.
It doesn't.
Does not.
So you can take a 60-minute nap.
Generally 20 to 45 minutes.
And then you fully fall asleep, or you're kind of like awake and just resting?
Yeah, I can fall asleep anywhere, anytime.
In like
I can
a
fall
minute?
asleep at a gun range. Yeah, it's
What?
It's in.
Can you sleep sitting up too like this?
Oh yeah, playing
That's a gift.
Anywhere.
That's a
It
gift.
is, although it could reflect that I'm pushing my system a little too hard.
Oh,
But it is useful at times.
incredible, man.
It
So
is
you can fall
useful.
asleep right on a plane or...
Anywhere, leaning against a
gosh.
in a subway station and anywhere. Yeah, if I need sleep, I'm going down.
That's incredible.
Yeah. So the other thing is that during sleep, a number of things happen, and we can talk about slow wave sleep and REM sleep. But one of the most important physiological functions of sleep is to clear out some of the cellular debris that accumulates throughout the day. The cellular debris creates cognitive deficits. It actually may be related to the aggregation of proteins and things that relate to dementia and Alzheimer's. It's the so-called glymphatic system. The lymphatic system is a system of moving through immune cells and clearing out of debris from the body. The glymphatic system is a kind of a equivalent system that exists in the brain that involves so-called glial cells, which are support cells, but also do many things actively. They're not just doing support. The glymphatic system is like a washout of the brain's debris. And that system seems to function best when feet are slightly elevated above the brain. There's some interesting data from University of South Carolina coming out now that show that if you can get your ankles elevated a little bit higher than your chin, that's great. So
When you're sleeping?
While you're sleeping.
What's it do for you?
It increases the glymphatic clearance, and there's some data that it can improve function of the brain. The studies that are happening now that I'm aware of, I'm in touch with that group, are mainly geared towards people that have had head injuries, so concussion and TBI of various kinds, but they also are seeing interesting effects in typical folks that don't have any traumatic brain injury. So I put a pillow underneath my ankles when I fall asleep, and to get a little bit of that elevation. And then during the day, if ever you can't get a nap, or you are going to get a nap, put your ankles up on the couch and lie down on the floor. That itself can get some of the clearance of the glymphatic
And that
system.
helps you sleep better, or it helps you just clean out the system?
It helps your brain function better when you wake up from sleep.
Interesting.
Yeah, that's what the data are starting to show.
Cool.
Some of the things I described, like the light viewing, it is baked into the neuroscience literature, hundreds of papers,
Yes.
published papers. Some of the things like the glymphatic system is kind of cutting edge. It's on the way, but because the safety margins of raising your ankles are so large, I mean, there's nothing dangerous about that.
Sure.
It's
How long do you need to do it for to get the benefits?
I think these are immediate benefits
Like
because
2 minutes or 10 minutes?
Oh no,
or
you're doing this the whole night that you're asleep. Your ankles
gotcha.
are elevated. If you wake up and you happen to kick the pillow out, it's not the end of the world. But the idea is that you don't want to be sleeping with your head above your ankles either. There is some evidence that when people travel on planes and they're sleeping in chairs, that's not equivalent to the kind of sleep they'd get when they're lying flat.
Interesting.
Independent of all the other things that are happening. And we know this because there are great sleep labs at Stanford, School of Medicine, at UPenn, back east and elsewhere, where people actually go into a clinic and sleep either upright or at different angles.
track it.
And they're looking at all this at the level of data.
Okay, so here's one for you. what's the best position to sleep? On your back, on your side, on your stomach?
Great question, and it really truly depends. And it probably depends on how hot you run. So I tend to run really warm. A lot of the cooling of the body occurs from the palms and bottoms of the feet, but also from the upper back and scapulae, because we accumulate what's called brown fat there. It's not the blubbery fat that's under the skin.
Right.
It's like a furnace. Actually, you can increase the density of brown fat by going into cold water repeatedly for 1 to 3 minutes several times each week.
Yes.
It means your furnace actually burns hotter. It allows you to be in cold temperatures more comfortably. Some really beautiful data just published on this. So I don't like to sleep on my back because I start heating up.
Start sweating.
That's right. So I tend to sleep on my side. I sleep in that, what is that? It's like soldier position. You know that?
Yeah.
But then again, there's some people that have shoulder issues and then they can't do that.
Yeah.
I'm relatively flexible through my shoulders, not super flexible, so I can do that. It really depends. Now, of course, if you're sleeping on your stomach, how do you elevate your ankles? You know,
Right.
this starts becoming a little bit, we are not just science experiments. And so you have to assume that you're not going to get everything exactly right. But keeping the room cool, keeping the cool, being under a warm enough blanket, but then extending a hand or an ankle out so that you could cool off during the middle of the night, that's going to be good. Keep the room dark, although complete pitch black doesn't seem to be as good as having a little bit of light somewhere in the room. Okay. But you don't want a bright blue light or red light anywhere in the room. That's going to wake you up. Some people like me have very thin eyelids, exceedingly thin eyelids. Some people have very thick eyelids. So some people are more bothered by a light in the room than others. It really varies.
Yeah.
So you have to just tune things to your particular environment.
I'm curious about the neuroscience before you go to sleep. How do we set our minds up to, you were saying before about a lot of people, it's hard for them to sleep because they can't shut their mind off.
Right.
Is there something we should be thinking before we shut it off to set our sleep up for success mentally, and then to really build into the next day where we wake up feeling like clear-minded and without this brain fog, where we have more motivation, where we have more energy and excitement towards the next day, and then doing that in a pattern every night? Is there any science around that? Is it like listening to a hypnosis
That could be very helpful.
Which will help you clean out whatever is going on through the day and get clear and ready for the next day, but also fall asleep so you're not thinking about it? Is there anything that can help you have better dreams so that you sleep better? Like, what have you found there in the neuroscience?
Yeah, so so glad you asked this question. There's some really interesting data from a guy named Charles Zeisler, who's at Harvard Med. He's done beautiful studies on sleep in humans for many decades, and a really fantastic physician and researcher. And they observed something interesting, which is that about 90 minutes or so before your natural bedtime, there's a spike in alertness, planning, and almost anxiety that all people undergo, and it's a normal, healthy pattern. The idea, and it's a just so story because we don't really know, I nor Chuck Zeisler nor anyone else was consulted at the design phase, as we say, but we assume this came about because prior to going to sleep, we need to shore up everything for safety. We need to, lock things down, make sure everything's in its place because we are very vulnerable in sleep. Nowadays, this might manifest as, you need to go to bed at 10:30 because you have to get up at 6, etc. And then right around 8:30 or 9, you start finding yourself running around doing various things. Many people worry about that and they think, oh, I'm really stressed because I actually need to go to sleep and here I am wide awake. It tends to subside very quickly. So just the knowledge that that's a normal, healthy spike in alertness and activity, I think can help a number of people. I want to make sure I mention that.
Yeah.
The other thing is preparing the mind, as you said, turning thoughts off. Turning thoughts off is a skill. We've talked before, almost a year or more ago, about Yoga Nidra.
Yes.
Which is, there are many, many Yoga Nidra scripts available on YouTube free of cost. The ones I particularly like are the ones by Kamini Desai, Kamini Kamini Desai. I just really like her voice. I don't know Kamini, never met her. These are free scripts. They're Yoga Nidra scripts that last about 20 minutes. They involve some breathing, some meditation type stuff. But they teach you to turn your thoughts off, which is really wonderful. Because a lot of people, they just get stuck in this rumination. Now, is there an ideal protocol prior to sleep? It depends, because some people find they have their greatest clarity after the kids are asleep and they're sitting there. So I wouldn't say don't work or do work. You do want to avoid strong stimuli before sleep. So do you really want to watch, politically charged or a violent movie right before sleep? Well, that depends on how triggered you tend to be by politics or violence. Some people aren't triggered, other people are.
Yeah.
But that aside, you don't want to go to bed either too hungry or too full, because that can inhibit your sleep. So for most people, that's going to be finishing your last bite of food about 2 hours before bedtime. But I confess there are days when I work and, arrive at a place, a hotel, order some food and just, eat a massive meal and then pass out.
Right.
Again, 80-20. Try and get it right 80% of the time. The glymphatic system is like a washout of the brain's debris. And that system seems to function best when feet are slightly elevated above the brain. There's some interesting data from University of South Carolina coming out now that show that if you can get your ankles elevated a little bit higher